As a lot of us game developers and general game enjoyers know, a lot of video games take a very long time to make. A lot of us also know how important stories are to human history, digital codings, and well-crafted stories. When the two are combined, you get an interactive and artistic story that can be considered an art piece, especially when paired with visuals. Most of us know this. However, many don't see video games as art, but as a different medium, made to make money rather than to be pretty. When it comes to games, the process behind making them and how it's executed, can it be compared to the artists of the past? Could a bad game still be considered an art piece? How much work goes into a game? Even if all these questions can't be answered, why is it still so hard to consider these amazing games pieces of art? Why are so many of these stories not considered stories? These are questions that sparked a debate on whether video games should be considered an art form. The following is a deep dive into the world of video games, of art, and of stories from a modern era. In 2019, Darshana Jaiman published an article titled Gaming in the Arts of Storytelling. In Jaiman's article, it highlights the traits of storytelling found in video games. It dives into different medias and different ways many people, companies, and overall games express a story or a personal issue in different yet alike ways. Using the comparison between fictional games and fictional movies, it explains how with gaming and with less restrictions, it gives creators an opportunity to make an even more in-depth story, especially with the concepts of sequels and franchises. Not only can they be in-depth, they can be simple and be adapted. It also brings up the many different art styles in games and such, as most live-action movies and books are usually too used to the same concept of art. With the way art being incorporated into their games, it furthers the embracement of creativity and imagination. In 2016, Melissa Somerden of the University of Missouri published an article called The Game Debate: Video Games as an Innovative Storytelling. Somerden brings up different examples of video games, like fighting, puzzles, and more, and explains how, even with their simplicity at the surface, they can have the most in-depth story in their games. They note the use of interactive cutscenes, cinematic cutscenes, character dynamics and taunts, and other forms of dialogue commonly found in video games. They also note with the usage of player avatars and how avatars can encourage players to embrace creativity and tell their own stories in games, or possibly follow along. This form of interactive storytelling helps pave the way for more interactivity in other possible media. However, just because it's possible now to incorporate these into movies and shows and more doesn't mean it's well executed in these films. Because of the lack of restrictions most games have over movies, it leaves them more of a chance to tell these stories through a long, pausable experience, or expand it through multiple games. The only downside is that you have to wait for releases, but it's the same with cinema. And in 2018, Lina Holta of University of Turkey wrote an article called The Effects of Art Styles on Video Game Narratives. The author delves into how art styles can either make or break a video game, and on their experience of artistic aesthetics found within games. While some people may be attracted to certain types of styles, like anime, some may also just avoid these games for that reason. Because of this, most games try to be as appealing as ever. You can see this in games like God of War, Detroit Become Human, the Mass Effect franchise, the Life is Strange franchise, Undertale or Deltarune, and more. Many of these games do look beautiful, but some of these games do not have a good feedback within their community. The article also mentions how important motifs are in games, especially to keep their story consistent. And now onto my favorite part of this entire video. This one has a lot more rambling incorporated in it because I didn't have to do actual research on a topic that I kind of just didn't want to read about. So yeah, I don't even know if I can put this part into the video, but I'm going to anyway to make it seem more authentic and more like a YouTube video rather than a class assignment, because that's really what this is. Now in 2015, this game developer by the name of Toby Fox created this really niche indie game. You probably never heard of it, called Undertale. Undertale by Toby Fox is one of the most popular games in the industry, especially for it being an independent game, or indie game for short. It is also one of the biggest examples of innovative and creative storytelling. It draws inspiration from old RPGs and Famicom games with its art style, specifically Earthbound or Mother 3 in certain locations. Earthbound itself has its own mix of games, inspired by not only its aesthetic, but its turn-based action, its combat, and its story. Not only that, but Tony Fox has the origins of game design in modding Earthbound. He also takes many inspiration from its soundtrack for his games, going as far as sample some of it into his own game soundtrack, which is in the background of this video if you hear it, because it has a really beautiful soundtrack, not even gonna lie. Undertale, however, has a modern and interactive spin on this turn-based ARG format, and has a creative and expansive, and I would say lore-intensive storyline that many gamers love. And by many gamers, I am specifically talking about a certain YouTube channel that loved to milk the shit out of this content. Sorry for throwing that in there. I went off script, but I just wanted it to be a little bit more authentic. Don't give me an F. With this being said, it is one of the biggest games that is commonly looped into the arguments and debates on whether or not games should be considered a form of art. In this case, I would say it should be considered art, especially if you consider the amount of art pieces that came from the work and the process of creating the game. With how well the game looks and how many outside sources of the game looks, you might as well consider it an art piece. And time for my favorite off-script ramble. This was originally going to be a really longer section of this video, explaining how predecessor versus a tribute to the game, and why one became a lot more popular. I would say that Earthbound is still popular in retrospect, but because of, lack of internet access and the lack of much more public spaces, of people knowing these outside games, or just having smaller communities based on these games, not a lot of people will probably have heard of Earthbound. So all I'm trying to say is, when it comes to games that inspire other games, and I could get into this in a completely different time, but I'm not going to get into it in this video. When it comes to games that inspire more games, I feel like we should also hold that original game to a really high standard, and I personally do. I personally never played Earthbound, and I don't think I ever will, but I don't think I need to play Earthbound to recognize how influential and how amazing of a game it possibly is. I mean, I could be saying that and then I go and play Earthbound and it fucking sucks, but I don't think it does, especially since it's inspired a lot of my favorite games like Omori and Undertale, so I'm not going to judge Earthbound yet. I'm just gonna hold it to a really high standard and hope it's good. So, yeah. Now, in 2005, something big hit the gaming market. And I think by me saying this, I feel like a lot of people already know what it is. It comes from a really good horror franchise. But before this game came out, the franchise wasn't really deemed as much. But the game I'm talking about in this section is Resident Evil 4 by Capcom. Capcom's Resident Evil 4 is one of the most influential games on the horror scene. If you define art based on its impact, then this would probably be the best example of that. From games to movies to spin-off shows, this game franchise has had a chokehold on the horror industry since the 2000s, but especially after the release of Resident Evil 4, it brought in the idea of the third-person survival horror, and rather than a top-down or fixed-angle game like its predecessors. Not only that, its development on the environment surrounding gameplay was revolutionary for its time, especially for 2005. Not many games, let alone survival horror games, were made to be over the shoulder and focus on it being first person or top down or at a set angle. But the release of Resident Evil 4 and the fact that you could see beyond a set environment around you and you could see locations rather than a room angle, it was deemed as stellar and it holds up to this day. The release of Resident Evil 4, however, spawned the release of many other franchises, like Dead Space, Silent Hill 2, and Mass Effect, although I wouldn't really consider Mass Effect as part of this. It is truly inspirational and environmentally driven and a story-driven game, and it's made to be that way. However, once again, this one's going a bit more off script because I do just have offhand notes rather than a set out, like, I guess, timeline of explaining this. When it comes to these spin-offs and other franchises being spawned out of Resident Evil 4, you have cheap clones or expensive knockoffs. And a lot of these, like, versions of, I would say, versions of Resident Evil 4 that aren't actually Resident Evil 4, like Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3, games that didn't need to be created but pioneered off the backs of the success of Resident Evil 4. I feel like these games were also just a good example on how much an industry can beat a really revolutionary idea to death. And now I feel like, especially in the modern era, there isn't anything new being done with this format. A lot of it has to now take place in apocalyptic zombie settings like The Last of Us or other games. And I would say that The Last of Us is a lot more original than other games that I've seen in this similar survival horror genre. I do feel like, however, a lot of it just goes off the same exact things Resident Evil 4 did. And it's kind of hard to find originality in this field. I do want to bring up a new game that's coming out later this year called The Grey Hill Incident, which is a new survival horror, and I feel like it does a really good job at revolutioning the genre once again. However, it's really not as mainstream as you think it is, and it's really upsetting. Instead of zombies and instead of big, really scary, creepy alien monsters like in alien survival games or in Dead Space, it's just kind of silly to look at, like classic Roswell incident video game looking aliens. And I think it kind of looks silly but also funny at the same time. I feel like it's a good way to incorporate not only comedic and I would say Hollywood level themery into a video game. I really am excited for this game to come out, and I honestly ever seen like only one or two trailers for this game, but judging by how it looks, I think it looks really beautiful, and I think it does look, I guess, funnier as well. And it doesn't have to be really sci-fi or super out there to be a good AAA game. I feel like just because of the setting, which is on Earth and takes place during an alien invasion, you don't have anything high-tech. You're just an ordinary farmer who happens to be in the midst of all this. You don't have to have like all these big-ass weapon upgrades and giant sci-fi things in order to have a good setting. It doesn't have to be all out there. It can just take place in your backyard. Hopefully I made sense with this one. Now this next one's going to be a little bit controversial. In 2015, the first ever game in this franchise was produced by Square Enix and Don't Nod Studios. The game being Life is Strange. Now, Life is Strange was a beautiful game, but only for its time, and even then, compare it to others, like A Plague Tale that came out at the same time, which, oh my god, I love A Plague Tale, it's such a beautiful game. It's a good example on how art and scenery doesn't make a game good. Another example of this is Detroit Become Human, but we're not gonna get into that in this video. We're not gonna get into that. That's a different time. It's often hailed for its environmental visuals and unique user interface, which I'm showing on the screen now, and I do love how amazing the interfaces look across each game, except for True Colors, because that game sucked. However, we're going to talk about the artistic direction the games consistently have. In each game, you can find beautiful landscapes and scenery, all computer generated to look a certain way depending on the character. In the first Life is Strange game, scenery is muted and calm and near photorealistic to match the main character's emotions and hobbies. In this case, being a shy and soft-spoken girl, learning to use her newfound powers for the benefit and for either herself or for others. And she has a knack for photography. In the second game, it resembles digitally hand-drawn art that has an emphasis on warm colors for an artistic teenage boy whose entire journey is to protect his powerful little brother and learning how to love and protect people he loves. In the third game, the scenery is bright and saturated, sun-kissed and warm, to reflect on the main character's heavily empathetic nature and gifts, who is learning to understand her own emotions rather than to prioritize others over her own. As she also makes music and she takes inspiration from her environment, feelings, and friends and family. Now, in the games themselves, they have really stark reflections that make it unique from each other, or at least attempt to. They incorporate these respective talents and styles and storylines into the UIs, like in the pause screens, making them unique and reflective as who you play as. In one game, it's neatly organized, and in the other, it's messy in the background of stained pants and dirt. It truly is something to see a game reflect its characters into its game entirely and give you a set narrative view. I'm gonna go off script because I didn't initially write about Captain Spirit in this script, but I'm gonna bring up the awesome adventures of Captain Spirit, and the only reason why I didn't bring it up is because the only thing really that kind of sets out its differences in its like scenery and background, because it takes place during Life is Strange 2, so there isn't any artistic differences I've noticed besides changes in scenery and at least going a little bit more imaginary and going to a lot more of a route that's based in, I guess, imagination, and that's seen within the cutscene I'm showing now. Captain Spirit's UI is also really unique and is hand-drawn and looks and resembles stuff of a child because the story is told through the perspective of a child. Now, the game is free and I do recommend playing it if you just want something to play in your free time. Okay, off-script honorable mentions that I consider like masterpieces in the gaming industry, and then I'm gonna finally conclude the video. But What Remains of Edith Finch. What Remains of Edith Finch is an amazing story immersive game and is the epitome of storytelling video games, and I love it. I love how creative the way it unravels its story. I love how at the end, it's spoilers, I love how at the end of the game it reveals itself that it either can be up to interpretation that the family was under a curse, or it was just its deep-rooted paranoia in said curse that caused all these accidents, that caused people to go missing, that caused their family members to die in such tragic ways, people wanting to blame something on something that couldn't exist, instead of absolving responsibility for their own careless actions. And someone already made a really good video on who was the true villain of Edith Finch, and I will be linking that in the description and putting it in like the little information bar. It's on your screen now, so you can go ahead and click it. Another game that I really love and is so underlooked, A Plague Tale Innocence and A Plague Tale Requiem. Now, I have yet to finish playing A Plague Tale Requiem, but Plague Tale Innocence is one of the only games that have managed to touch my heart in such an amazing and heartfelt way. I feel this game should have won, because I know Requiem was nominated for a E3 award. I feel this game should have also won one of the game awards. Okay? This game is beautiful. This game is sad. You want a brother-sister relationship from two estranged siblings that never got the chance to meet each other because one sibling was deathly ill and had to be sheltered from the world, now is the cause of the literal plague? Oh my god, and you have to protect them because you're the older sister in this game. And it goes back and forth between playing as each character and seeing the characters' views, and by each character it's just the main two, Amicia and Hugo, and these two, oh my god, you can see the vast differences of the two's characters, not only within their gameplay respectively, like the gameplay of Hugo taking advantage of his body size and allowing him to have crawling based stealth and quietness based stealth, while Amicia has more combat and more quick rushed in stealth incorporated into her story. Just play the game, it's amazing. I really do love that game. It's masterpiece. And with that being said, I would like to finally conclude this video. Now, this is the final part in quotations. Conclusion, basically. And when it comes to these modern iterations of storytelling, the cross between entertainment and interactivity is inevitable. Many people prefer this cross in the form of video games, and some people prefer it in choose-your-own-adventure movies like Bandersnatch on Netflix, which also, by technicality, are video games. This form of expression, this form of entertainment, it shouldn't be so hard for it to be considered a piece of art. It's also sad to say that this is one of the last mediums besides independent films and cinema that are willing to create new and different stories. With most things being either sequels, adaptations, or retellings, finding original work is like finding hay in a needle stack. Truly, at its core, video games, especially the many ones I've seen, are nothing short of beautiful masterpieces and really well-written stories. Things that should be preserved in libraries of Congress. Not just one singular game, Mario, just for nostalgia's sake, or just because it has a new movie coming out, but multiple and because of amounts of Now, this is the final part in quotations. Conclusion, basically. And when it comes to these modern iterations of storytelling, the cross between entertainment and interactivity is inevitable. Many people prefer this cross in the form of video games, and some people prefer it in choose-your-own-adventure movies like Bandersnatch on Netflix, which also, by technicality, are video games. This form of expression, this form of entertainment, it shouldn't be so hard for it to be considered a piece of art. It's also sad to say that this is one of the last mediums besides independent films and cinema that are willing to create new and different stories. With most things being either sequels, adaptations, or retellings, finding original work is like finding hay in a needle stack. Truly, at its core, video games, especially the many ones I've seen, are nothing short of beautiful masterpieces and really well-written stories. Things that should be preserved in libraries of Congress. Not just one singular game, Mario, just for nostalgia's sake, or just because it has a new movie coming out. There are many games that should be preserved and put into these libraries because of the amount of entertainment, the amount of joy, and the amount of creativity it brings to the table. I petition that The Last of Us gets into there, especially because the new show is getting a lot of attention. I think that The Last of Us 2 should be put into Library of Congress. This was off script, by the way, but I'm just saying that. It's a good game. Please put it in there. From trigger-happy sandbox games like GTA 5 or Yandere Simulator, which is never going to release and people need to stop hoping it does, to games that make no sense like Wobble Dogs, to games that are simply underlooked, and to those that inspire others like Five Nights at Freddy's and Earthbound. I feel like art itself doesn't need to have a meaning, and neither should games. A game shouldn't have to beat God of War's Ragnarok to be considered a masterpiece. And with that, I'd like to quote my good friend, my awesome friend who is probably watching this video because I'm sending it to them first, who probably quoted someone else. Video games are art, but not all art is good. Anyway, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I want you guys to ask yourself, what's a game that you played that completely changed your life? What's a game that you played that you think should be considered an art piece? I would personally say Season, a recent game, and by recent I literally mean it came out in February, that I have just started playing, and I didn't have the chance to finish because my computer sucks. But I think it's a really truly beautiful game, and it just recently dropped its soundtrack and is available for sale. And I will be playing some of the music in the background as well because it has such a heartwarming soundtrack, and I think it's really beautiful. I do recommend this game, and if you want a quick game that you can just play in your spare time as well, I also recommend Coffee Talk, which is also a really good game when it comes to storytelling. Anyway, with all of that being said, and all the rambling pushed aside, I've been Co Lourdes is said in the channel name. Probably never gonna upload a video ever again. This was for a class assignment. Hi, Mr. Bartlow, I love you. Thank you for an awesome semester, and I would like to thank everyone else who isn't my teacher for watching this video. If you like the video, go ahead and like. If you want to, go ahead and subscribe, but I doubt that this will ever happen again, me making a video, because I don't think I have the time to right now. So, yeah. I would like to thank you all for watching. Have a nice day. I love you all. Bye bye.